panel here, so let me try this a bit. Keep going.
Yeah, that's definitely messing with my pacemaker. And so the point is just that wherever you come down on the actual issue of abortion, you're taking an ideological position. I'll get back to that in a minute. It's funny when you talk about the mainstream press, though. Like, and you mentioned Piers Morgan. When my book tour came out, one of the first places I went on Piers Morgan's show on CNN, which now thankfully is being canceled because ours is a good and just God. And so I don't expect interviewers to have read books by authors. I mean, if you have a daily show, it is just impossible to read everybody's book who cycles through your studio. I was a little surprised when I came on the studio, and maybe it's interacting with that thing. Put it up here. I was a little surprised when I went into the studio, and Piers Morgan was looking at my book sort of the way you would expect an orangutan to look at an iPad, just sort of like, and looking at the picture, looking at me, just very confused. It was weird. It was truly weird. But he asked me one of the greatest questions an interviewer can ask, which is simply, "What's your book about?" So I basically gave a version of the answer, the thing I just told you, that the first lie liberals tell is the lie they tell themselves, that they're not ideological, that they have no agenda, that they only want to do what works, blah, 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 blah. And Morgan goes, "Right, good. So," and then he starts asking me all these questions about why Mitt Romney is such a terrible person, and I'm like, really? And he says, "Look, Jonah, I'm just a reporter. I have no agenda. I have no, I'm a straight shooter." And it was the beginning of what I noticed all across my book tour, which was interviewers thinking that they could disprove the thesis of my book by confirming its thesis. And I remember, how about if I just project? Does that work? Okay. I remember when I went on my book tour. There you go. I went to, I was on the San Francisco NPR station, which, as you can imagine, I'm there all the time, And time and again, the interviewer actually was not bad. He was much better than Piers Morgan. And I don't mean to be such a pain in the butt to Piers Morgan. It's just the fastest route to his brain. The NPR interviewer was actually pretty good, and he had read the book, and he asked some good questions. But then we went to the callers, and caller after caller kept saying things like, "Why do you conservatives have to be so ideological? Why do you have to, have so much, care so much about these things? Why can't you just care about doing what works?" Right? And I was like, "Did you listen to the first 5 minutes where I said that my whole point is that liberals think that they're the only ones who care about what works?" And finally, it was like the fourth or fifth caller who goes through a whole mantra of, "Why are you guys, why are you so ideological? We just don't think about that. And when it comes to things like gay marriage and all this, why do you want to impose your views on other people?" And you could he was a nice guy, but you could almost hear his ponytail over the phone. And so I explained to him again, I'm sort of a squish on gay marriage, and whatever side you come down on that, that's fine. That's not what my point here. My point here is that if you think that conservatives are the ones who are the ideologues imposing their point of view on society, you have to account for the fact that, depending on how you do the math, this whole idea of one marriage, one woman, one man for marriage it's been on the books for about 3,000 years, give or take. And it's only in the last 15 years that anyone has sort of come along and said, "No, we got to change that." And that's fine. What I think a lot of liberals, sincere, decent, honest liberals, don't appreciate is that they are, in fact, the aggressors in the Cold War. I mean, not the Cold War. That too, maybe. No. Just kidding. No, they're aggressors in the culture war. And they're proud of it, right? They say they're the forces of progress, the agents of change. That is the whole reason to join the progressive movement, is to advance these things that you believe in. And it's sort of like this weird battered wife thing, that when conservatives complain or resist, they immediately start screaming, why are you trying to impose your views on other people? You know, liberals have a lot to be proud of, from, you know, the civil rights movement to, you know, and if you believe in all the things about gay rights and certainly feminism and all that, they have lots of stuff to be proud of. But you can't, on the one hand, be proud of how you've affected change on society and at the same time claim that you're the victim in the culture war. The whole orientation of the conservative movement for the last 40, 50 years has been essentially a leave me alone coalition. People who don't want the government to impose things on their lives. The whole ethos of progressivism, going back a century at least, has been the reverse. Of expanding the role of the federal government in people's lives, expanding the role of government, and of imposing values on other people because they think that other people should live differently. Sometimes they've been absolutely right. Sometimes they've been absolutely wrong. But you can't tell me that it's A, not an ideological point of view, and B, tell me that anybody who resists them are the only ones who are the aggressors. It just doesn't make any sense. So anyway, gets back to the actual topic of things. So I first came across this stuff, this idea, when I was reading a fairly controversial essay, you know, about 10 years ago now, or something close to that, by Jonathan Chait, who was then with the New Republic. And he wrote an essay called Fact Finders. And the whole argument was there's a fundamental sociological difference between conservatives and liberals. Conservatives are ideologues, they're bound up in dogma, they go with their what it says that it should be on a piece of paper, and they don't react with real life. It says liberals are different, they're empiricists, they're fact finders, hence the title of the essay, right? If they find out that something works better, they go that way. They're ideology free. He even says that if God came down to earth tomorrow and said to conservatives, or if God came down to earth tomorrow and told liberals that John Maynard Keynes or Galbraith or Marx or whoever, some liberal, you know, icons of economics, that they were all wrong, and in fact Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and those guys were right, and that free market policies are better and then work better, liberals would say, okay. And they would become free market guys because they just go with where the truth is. And but if God came down and made the same deal with conservatives, but told them that no, in fact, Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and Thomas Sowell, those guys are all wrong, and in fact, Keynes and Marx and those guys are all right, conservatives would refuse to go with the truth because we are so dogmatic and so committed to these ideological principles that we live in this parallel universe. And his key example in it, right? Certainly, yeah, his key example was remember, this was before Obamacare was, or before anyone knew who Obama was, let alone Obamacare. And certainly before Barack Obama somehow outsourced a healthcare website to the finest computer programmers the Amish community had to offer. It's funny, side note, I was on the Special Report online show once, and I basically made that joke, and Charles Krauthammer decided to have some fun with me, and he was like, I, for one, want to disassociate myself from these outrageous comments about the good and noble people of the Amish community. And I cut Charles off. I was like, Charles, why are you even bothering? It's not like they're watching. Anyway, so he cites as the key example of conservative dogmatism and closed-mindedness the fact that conservatives keep going around saying we have the best healthcare system in the world. And he says, don't these people know that the World Health Organization has just come out with a definitive study that ranks America's healthcare system 37th in the world? And that was it, right? It was a study, right? It's like, you know, binder, and it's got charts and stuff. It's just got to be true, right? And the problem with the study was it was like the worst study ever. And I know that sounds like hyperbole. I don't know why people think I use hyperbole, but just crazy people think I use hyperbole. So let me read you a quote from a guy named Scott Atlas, who's a fellow at the Hoover Institution. He's on the nominating committee for the Nobel Prize in Medicine. He's one of the world's leading epidemiologists, and he's a chair in neuroscience at the Stanford Medical Center, all these wonderful things. And he did a close-in look at the study, and he said, right, he called it the worst study ever. The reason why it was the worst study ever is that it considered financial fairness as a key metric of whether a system was good. So how you paid for the healthcare system, whether it redistributed wealth from the top to the bottom, all that kind of stuff, made up a huge portion of its score. And this is a perfectly legitimate way to talk about healthcare systems. You know, that's fine. It's an important question. How do we pay for them? All that kind of stuff. But you can't tell me it's not an ideological position. If your position is it's a great healthcare system because it's more economically just, that's fine. But the simple fact is that might make it best by one ideological criteria. But the fact that we have the best cancer survival rates in the world might make it best for another ideological criteria. Saudi princes don't fly here to get healthcare because of the financial fairness of our healthcare system. If they did, you know, they would have flown to, I don't know, Belize or something, right? And so the point is that it is absolutely wrong to say in 2007 or whenever this was that we have the best healthcare system in the world by some measures. And it is absolutely wrong to say we have the 37th worst healthcare system in the world by other measures. The question is, what are your assumptions about what a healthcare system should look like? And these are ideological assumptions. And what so much of the left does is they hide deeply ideological assumptions based in these supposedly pragmatic, empiricist, fact-finding kind of statements, right? Oh, it's in a study, it must be true. And so, again, it's an ideological question about how good our healthcare system is now or it was then. But the thing is that conservatives are at least open about saying that we have these sort of questions. You know, economic egalitarianism isn't necessarily high on our list, but quality control is, and all. You know, you can figure out your own standards. And so my point is that there are so many of these things that serve to advance ideological arguments without openly declaring why your ideology. And you know, it's funny. George Orwell wrote about this in what I think is the best political essay of the 20th century, Politics in the English Language. And he didn't use the word cliche because he's a better writer than I am, and he probably knew that even talk radio guys back then couldn't pronounce it. But he talked about euphemisms and dead metaphors and these kinds of phrases that come to us. He says they come to us like prefabricated hen houses. And sometimes they actually do our thinking for us. And that's sort of what I'm trying to get at. I'm not talking about buzzwords and, you know, the death tax or you know, bumper sticker stuff. Everybody has that. That is endemic to politics, right? Republicans talk about job creators. Drives me crazy, right? I mean, no one goes into business to become a job creator. People go into business to create wealth, to build a business. They're happy to create jobs, but you know, no one goes into a bank and says, "I've got a great idea for a business. I need $1 million loan," and the bank loan officer says, "Great, what's the idea?" He says, "Well, I haven't worked that out yet, but I'm going to create a lot of jobs." Right? It's not how it works. Or like on the liberal side, the one that drives me crazy the most is this whole idea that came out of the stimulus that it created or saved X million jobs, right? Two things bother me about this. First of all, it is an entirely new standard in our politics about economic policy that was created and accepted uncritically by the media. And second of all, it's utterly unfalsifiable. You know, what I mean by this podium right now is scaring away unicorns. You know, prove me wrong, right? I, for a fact, can tell you that every morning I wake up and I do or save 500 push-ups.